Hey there, special educators, and welcome back to another episode of Teach Task Box Inspire. I'm your host, Lisa Hollady, and I am beyond excited to introduce today's guest, Amanda Matsumoto. Amanda wears so many hats that I'm honestly in awe. She's a high school speech and language pathologist with a caseload of over 60 students, a head softball coach, and someone with experience in both ABA therapy and outpatient facilities. So her dedication to supporting students in every aspect of their lives is nothing short of inspiring. Today, Amanda will share her expertise on connecting with students and the transformative impact on using AAC devices. Whether you're new to AAC or a seasoned educator, Amanda's insights are sure to empower you with practical strategies to help students find their voice. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Hey, special educators. Welcome to Teach Task Box Inspire, the podcast dedicated to making your job as a special education teacher easier by making your instruction more fun for you and your students. Inside each episode, you'll learn how to get the most use out of your task boxes in the classroom. I'm your host, Lisa Hollady from Chalkboard Superhero, a veteran special education teacher passionate about empowering you with purposeful teaching strategies, helpful tips and tricks, and other classroom management tools that will help you thrive in your role. Let's get started with today's episode. All right. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
All right. I want to start by asking you to kind of introduce yourself, what you do, what your role is, and how you got there.
So my name is Amanda Matsumoto. I am a speech language pathologist. Right now I work at a high school, and then I have a middle school, and then I'm also the SLP for a program called Project Search, which is kind of like a work-based internship. And then I've kind of had a crazy ride being in the high school. I'm also the head softball coach at the high school I'm at. Did speech therapy, really switched the schools for softball, but then ended up falling in love with the high school and the secondary setting. So it's been a really fun ride.
Where were you before the high school?
I was previously at an outpatient clinic, and then I completed my clinical fellowship year at a center for ABA, and they had a bunch of related services in there. So primarily saw a lot of intellectual disabilities and then autism.
Oh, sweet. So you like the high school then?
I do, which I never in a million years would have thought that.
How long have you been doing that?
This will be my third year at the high school.
And you're not moving anywhere. You're like, I love this.
Yeah, I think this is definitely where it's at.
Oh, I love that. So tell me, like, how many kids are on your caseload? What is the range in disabilities and whatnot?
Currently, I'm about around 60 if you include both indirect and direct minutes. I primarily see, I think I have mostly autism. I have a couple students I see for fluency, and then I have a good chunk of, I have a ton of AAC users, and then I see a little bit of artic here and there, but mostly AAC, and then working on a lot of the pragmatics and social aspects of language, which has been really interesting, but really cool at the same time.
Yeah, especially in the high school setting. That's got to be such a whole different ball game there.
Yes, especially coming off that COVID years where they were in middle school. And so.
For sure. For sure. So I know that you said that you wanted to talk about, like, you're very familiar with using AAC with your students. Do you want to kind of talk to the listeners about, how you can get your students to use AAC devices and really kind of get the teachers on board to using it too? I think that's kind of where a big problem lies, is we can do all the speech we want, but when it comes to when you leave or they leave your office, a lot of times it's not being used. So can you talk on that?
Yeah, I think actually my first couple of years, I had to get a lot of buy-in and really work towards establishing relationships with these teachers to get that buy-in. I think that was one of the most challenging things. Was my first year, I'd walk in and I'd see the devices like sitting in their backpacks or in the lockers or on a shelf, not charged. And so really establishing those relationships and then holding a lot of trainings, but also showing how it can just be a part of what they're already doing. because I know special education teachers have so much on their plate. And so to add a bunch of modeling and things like that can definitely be challenging. But also, I've worked really hard to make sure that like everything that we're doing in speech is directly aligned with what they're doing curriculum wise, and kind of providing a lot of visuals for my teachers has been really helpful.
How do you go about doing that? Because I feel like a lot of times teachers don't have a lot of planning time to sit down with any SLP. So, how do you know what they're about to teach or the curriculum that they're using?
We do a lot. They've allowed me to kind of see their lesson plans, which has been, a big part of it and forming that relationship with those teachers. And then I can also see kind of we use something called ULS curriculum.
Oh,
So I
yeah,
do
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of see where their lessons are and what chapters they're in. And then me and the teachers collaborate to figure out, what are the main targets and the main vocabulary words they need to use for that chapter, that unit. And so that's been something that we work on, but definitely taking advantage of our in-service days, our work, like our teacher work days, and like holding a quick minute, like quick 20-minute planning training just to kind of show them, here's how we can be incorporating what you're doing and then also using their devices at the same time.
I love that. And I don't think that there is quite enough training on using these AAC devices because I just always feel like it's way, way on the back burner in a lot of districts. Even the current district I'm in right now, we just had a PD day and there was nothing for special ed to choose from, and which makes
So,
it makes me so sad because I know that there is training out there available. I
yeah.
just don't know. This is probably not the forefront of where it should be. But how did you go to your directors or your principals and say, hey, I really want to do this training, or how do you get that going?
I think for me at the beginning, I was doing some pushing a lot. And so my teachers were seeing, like what I'm doing and directly doing like modeling while they're teaching at the same time. And so also getting your paraprofessionals on board is a
Yeah.
huge piece of that.
Yeah.
Because they're there working with those students a lot more closely than I am. And
Right.
I can't be in pushing in, all day long as much as I would love to do that.
Right.
You just don't have that time. But I did, I've talked to our principal, I've talked to director of special education we have a team lead. And so I kind of talked to them about like, hey, this is really important. If we want our kids to start generalizing these skills, we need to start holding trainings for them. And, even in those IEP meetings, you have those conversations. A lot of times I write in the IEP like indirect minutes for a lot of my AAC users to be able to do some of that training and the collaboration with those teachers, which took me a long time to get that buy-in. And then also a lot of the general education teachers who our students are seeing. So like for PE, for art, for music, I provided a communication board for them, but then also, showing them it's not that you don't have to sit here and model all day long, but here's some quick ways you can do that while you're instructing the rest of the class. And so just making yourself visible, I think was the biggest like success I saw is that I'm there all the time and, I'm forming a relationship with our students and then also being visible and a consistent person as part of the team is
Right.
kind of where it's at. But yeah, I did have to go and approach, our directors and be like, hey, like on an in-service day, can we take the paraprofessionals or can I take, the special education teachers and kind of go through what it could look like without having to add more work.
I, really, I know it is hard because I think that a lot of times teachers, and I don't know if you see this where you're at, you're in South Carolina, right?
Mhm.
And so I see a lot of teachers just don't want to, they don't think that they have a right to touch these devices because, that's their device. And then that lends themselves to, well, I don't know what I'm doing with it. So I can't help them with that. And so how do you get past that? Like, I feel like it's just such a big hurdle to say, okay, yes, you can touch it. Yes, you're to model the language, the words, any content that you're doing. How do you get past that? I know you said relationships, but it is such a big buy-in. But once you have them, you got them. But
Yes. I think, a lot of times they feel unqualified and they also are like, I just don't have like any type of expertise. Like, I don't want to ruin anything. But
yeah,
I always try to use the example of, a toddler has so much access to language and you're constantly saying things all the time. Our AAC users, this could be the first time they've had access to language. And
right.
so even if it's like something quick, like a word or like, even if they're a lot of my teachers are like, oh, they're like stimming or they're just like pressing random buttons, like
Right.
letting them explore and being like, this is their first time they've had access to language. And it's like just like a baby's exploring and babbling and things like that. That's how they're learning it too. So we have to be providing that input as well. And so I'm always trying to be like, hey, like if there's any time you have a question on something or how you can learn, like let's talk about it real quick. And even like I've provided like visuals for them to even just like, we've done like cheat sheets as well. And so like showing them how to get to some of that vocabulary and those core
Oh,
words
yeah. That's
on their
actually a
device.
really great idea. I've never had an SLP give me cheat sheets. I love that. That's
Yeah. So
great.
like showing them where the symbol is on the device has been that actually was something I started incorporating probably last year of like, here's where it is on their device. So like even a paraprofessional can find, a word that they're learning about in their reading
Right.
and being able to quickly find it. Cause that's another thing. It's like, oh shoot, I have no idea where it is on this device.
Right.
And so
Especially if they are using, a bunch of different, Proloquo and TouchChat and whatever it is that they're using, you're very familiar with one, and then all of a sudden another student walks in and you're like, wait, I don't have this one down
yeah.
yet. Let me play with it a little bit.
And there's so many different grid sizes that
Yeah.
they're all using. So
Yeah, yeah. So I have a challenge question for you then, because I think when I was last year, I had a K2 autism group, and my biggest struggle with their AAC devices would be the stimming on words. And so, playground, 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 playground. At what point or how would you guide a teacher to get away from stemming off the same words or stemming off a particular sentence, or do you just let them because that's their words?
there's like a fine line that this has always been something that I like have constantly been learning because it's like again like just like a toddler's babbling and trying to say words all the time like this is what they're doing but at the same time I try to teach them like how can we expand upon that like are you asking to go to the playground or are you did you like something on the playground or things like that like adding more language to just what they're doing but
Right.
then also I have had a student who like loves to talk about their schedule and will just talk about the schedule all day long if we let them. And so I'm like, okay, you asked us and making sure like we acknowledge that the first one or two times and then being able to be like, okay, like redirecting right back to the curriculum or whatever we're working on, but always validating, okay, I know you really like the playground. We are going at 10 o'clock or whatever it is and like putting it even if you write on like a dry erase board okay playgrounds at this time so that they can easily like refer to that right away so they're not constantly asking about it.
Right. That I think was my biggest struggle with where to draw the line, And I used to have paraprofessionals who would quite literally take their device out of their hands when it got too annoying. And I would have to say, I would stop them and say, you can't do that to a typical, speaking student. You can't just take their words out of their hands. And they would just say, okay, I'll turn the volume down. So it's just like a constant struggle. And I think this is more near and dear to my heart because my son has special needs and uses his own device. And so watching other people try to communicate with him, especially unfamiliar listeners who either just get annoyed or they have no idea what he's saying or aren't listening as well as they would somebody who is a a typically developing student. So anyways, this is something I've always wanted to know. How do you measure progress in speech therapy using their AAC devices?
So I always like to do like a inventory like if it a lot of my students have had their devices but then I have some that I just put on devices who finally had that cognitive ability to start actually using one instead of like having all these behavior challenges and things like that but one of the biggest things I've done is like can they generalize the skill and not just use like a request, just like
Okay.
a food request. So being able to request like things they need, or are they generalizing it to the classroom and are they asking? I have a lot of students that like work on asking questions. So are they able and answering questions? Like, are they able to answer in conversation and then both in a structured task? And so, taking data on that, I do some observations of what they're using their device for independently and what we're modeling. But then the good thing about high school, and actually your task box cards have really, really helped me with,
Oh, I
it
love that.
is applying to real life situations. So like, for example, like I have a student who's been working on like who, what, when, where questions, and your mailbox, your mail ones
Yeah.
were a huge help for me of like, okay, they can answer, if I read them a story, but now I'm like, okay, here's a letter. Who's this letter going to? And being able to like find that and type that on their device, or, they found like where it's going and they go to the states, different things like that, and applying it to not just like the same type of task, but other tasks that you can like generalize, or like being able to ask unfamiliar partners, communication partners, or are they, requesting in PE? Are they commenting here? And then, role playing a lot. We do a ton of that, like
Yeah.
real life conversations, not just, we're going to read a book and we're going to do this symbol all day long. But yeah, your task boxes have been a huge help. Like I've been able to use them for so many different goals. So I appreciate all your time on those.
I mean, certainly let me know if you need any more because I think once I started, so I always thought I was going to be in elementary, and then when I got to high school, I slowly realized I'm like, oh, I only have them for a very short amount of time before they're in the real world.
Mhm.
And I'm like, these kids have no idea. And so coming up with a lot of those task boxes, I did like on the spot of we're out in the community and they can't even recognize which bathroom to go into. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is a serious issue. Great, you have great reading comprehension, but you can't find the bathroom.
Yeah.
Like that's terrible. So trying to build that type of curriculum, like while I'm flying the plane was quite interesting because I couldn't find anything out there
Yeah. No,
that related to that. But yeah, that's exactly why and what pushed me to kind of want to create a lot of that stuff because I'm
it's
like, these
life
kids need
skills.
to know.
Yeah, and like the community-based instruction, like I've been fortunate that a lot of your task boxes have helped us prepare for some of our community-based outings, like the one you have about like sorting stuff and like
Yeah.
finding sizes. Like my students are like, oh, here's like sorting that, but then also we're going to the store and applying it to use their device. Like I need a medium blue shirt
Right.
and things like that. And so
Oh, I
there's
love
so many
that.
different goals that we've been able to target. And so I appreciate all your time because there was not something like that. And I'm like, trying to find materials, making my own, but they have been so helpful to target so many different goals. And then I have like, some of my other students who are we have something called a credential program out here. I don't know if that's something
No.
you guys have, but so we have like, they're going to get like a work employment certificate once they're done.
Okay, we have
And
something very similar. Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, so we do that. And so there's just been so many life skill application ones that I've loved. And so I really like appreciate all of your hard work because I know those take a really long time.
They really do. Okay, so what is the best piece of technology or resource you have used within the last few years that you're like, I love this thing?
I really think that every classroom that has a bunch of AAC users should get a projector. Like there's Promethean boards, right? And so one of the best like things that I found, or a portable monitor, I have both. I was able to apply for a grant last year. And so we got these projectors that go to their iPads, and I'm like projecting it right next to the Promethean board. So I'm modeling it right next to it because
What?
I was having such a hard time. You know how like on an iPad you can do side by side,
Yeah.
like and share two different like apps at the same time. Well, it's small. My students couldn't see it. They would be squinting, and I was like, there has got to be something we can do. And so I applied for this grant to get these projectors. And so we can either project their device like straight from their iPad, or I have their apps as well on my iPad. And so it goes right next to their whatever they're learning on the Promethean board, or like the morning meeting, like all of those things. Or I also bought myself a portable monitor, and you just like use the cord to the iPad and it plugs right next into it. And so I'm telling you, like that has been a game changer for us.
My mind is blown. I have never heard of that. And I feel like back in my old classroom last year, I could have 100% used that. All of my students had AAC devices, and we were running around of the room
Yep.
trying to make sure everyone was on the same page. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And so having that, especially like, because the side by side like distorts their like app. And so I put something right next to it. We got it, or the portable monitor, and it has, I'm telling you, like it's a game changer.
That's amazing. I'll probably have to link that in the show notes because I feel like people are going to be like, wait, what? Let's do
Yeah.
this.
And I can just send you some pictures too of what that kind of looks like.
I would love that because I feel like that would be a game changer for a lot of people.
Because it helps with like their peers too, like to see like, oh, that's how so and so like that they have something to say. Like that's been really
Yeah,
cool too, because I'll plug it up to their own device as well to let them respond to what the questions are. So it's been fun.
that is amazing. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's see. Okay, what's one quick tip you would give to a new either special education teacher or a new SLP?
I think just letting yourself have balance, because I know like all of us as special education, like we love our students, we love our jobs, but having a balance and allowing yourself to breathe and give yourself some grace, but not putting pressure on yourself. Because I think for my first couple of years, I was like always like putting pressure of like, how am I going to get them? Like these kids are going right into the world in a couple of years. Like I only have this amount of time, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. But
Yeah.
knowing you're still making a difference.
Yeah. That's great advice. Everyone should take that advice. I don't know if everyone will actually do it, but
Yeah.
everyone should listen to that because seriously, it is not easy to be a first year teacher at
Oh yeah.
all.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. What keeps you inspired and what advice would you give to people to kind of stay motivated? And I will say this with a caveat because my last job, I just felt burnt. I wasn't even sure I wanted to teach anymore. And I'm finally in a spot where my fire is just firing. I absolutely love my new position and I feel like a brand new person. I am wanting to go to work every day. So, those people out there who are like absolutely burnt out, what advice would you give them?
I think that was me before I switched to my current job. I was absolutely burnt out. I loved, working with my patients, but it was just not the right setting, I think. So I think, not being afraid to try other settings and finding that good fit, but also being patient with yourself and, your team. But yeah, it's definitely, I think to stay motivated, just thinking of your students and knowing, you have the opportunity to make a difference and just realizing like you're in that role. And so I always try to think about that. But yeah, I was burnt out before and I was like, I do not want to go to work. But like
Hmm.
now I'm like, oh my gosh, I love my job. I get up and I'm like motivated. I'm like, okay to go do
Right,
this.
right. I think that a lot of times we get in our own head, like, this was great last year. What's different this year? Or, I feel like a lot of teachers don't realize that every year could be so different, whether it's the students or new teachers come in or administration, something could change to where it feels toxic all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And it's not like healthy for you to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And it's okay to walk away. I've seen teachers, still stay there 25 years later and they'll complain and I can tell that they're burnt. I'm like, why are you still here?
Yeah.
You should you should find another job.
Also, like take your PTO, like use those days. Like I think
Yes.
for me, my first 2 years, I was like so worried about like letting people down if I was not there. And like you can't pour from an empty cup, and that's so cliche to say, but it's so true. Like
It really is true.
I've always like I think it's partly being an athlete mindset of like if I'm not working, someone's working harder than me. And
Yeah.
so it's like I was always constantly putting this pressure on myself to like be the best at what I do. But it's like you can't do that if you're burnt out and exhausted. And I was like always scared to take PTO because I'm like, oh, they're gonna be like, this girl's not here, she's slacking off. But like, no, like I'm taking this time so that I can be my best me the next
Hmm. I
day.
mean, I'm sure there's teachers out there actually just saying that, but they're just they need lives. But yes, PTO, especially I feel like, and I don't know if you have kids, but I have three young kids and it's it's insane to kind of work all day and then come home and be a mom and then work all day and come home. And so sometimes if you're not taking your PTO how you should, or you're putting yourself first at all, you will feel it. You'll get into a mental state that you can't get out of, and it's so important. Mental health is so important
Yeah.
to make sure that you are present all of the
Yes.
time.
Especially in all those different roles you have as both like a mom and an educator.
Yeah.
And you got to be on pretty much all day long and be
Hmm.
okay with taking rest and like walking away from something. It's
Right.
okay.
Right, right. All right, before we wrap up, did you want anything else to add to the conversation or Any final thoughts?
Not that I can think of. I have really just enjoyed all the materials you've made, and I really think that there's going to be so much technology in AAC coming around. And so I'm really excited to see what other people are using and doing.
Well, you have been great. I would love to have
Thank
you
you
on a guest sometime in the future because you
for sure.
you have shared a lot of information. Can our listeners connect with you at all? Is there anywhere you are?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I have a account that I'm using for speech. I'm waiting for some like licenses to come through so that they can use some of the materials I have, but it is at Charleston Speechy.
Okay.
So that is the Instagram I'm using for speech. And then my regular Instagram is Connect the Mots, Motts after my last name.
Oh, nice. Nice. I will have to drop all those links in the show notes, but
For sure. But yeah, if you ever need like ways that your like team or other people can use your task boxes, because it's been probably the best investment I've made material-wise, because I don't think people realize like how many different ways you can target that or even how to target that with AAC users or beyond.
I will tell you, no one at the high school level where I was using task boxes, but I had them all in there. I mean, rows and rows and rows because I make them, of course.
Yeah.
But my SLP would come in and just rummage through. And she's like, I never used task boxes before.
Yeah.
And it's funny. 'Cause she's the one who actually told me to start selling them already pre-made on Etsy. And I said, no one would ever purchase them on Etsy. And she was like, no, no, no. And she's holding a huge one. She's like, I would buy this for like $200. I'm like, no, no, you wouldn't. She's like, no, really, I have no time to put the stuff together.
Yeah.
So thank you, Amy, for letting me do that because Etsy kind of just blew up. And I'm like, I cannot believe people have a need, but people don't have time.
Well, yeah, like to
So
Velcro all that, to put
yeah,
all the Velcro to laminate, like it takes a long time.
it does. And I
Are
don't
you
have
the
the
one
time.
laminating those, or
No,
you have
no.
somebody that do that?
Yeah, I hired my sister. My sister actually was kind of like looking for a second income. And I'm like, I kind of want to open this Etsy store. Do you think you can laminate for me? And she's like, okay, what's that? Because she's a paralegal. She's like, what do I have to do? So yeah, she kind of took over for me. And I was like, yep, go have at it. So I don't even really pay any attention to it. She does the whole thing because I don't have time. But it gives her money and it gives people what they want. So all
No, yeah,
all power to her.
because people
So
don't have time to be laminating and
yeah, yeah.
Velcroing.
I don't.
No, I don't either.
I've been doing that for 16 years. I was over Velcro. Sometimes she's like, "Can you help me? I'm behind." And I started it and I'm like, "Oh, I hate this job. I don't like doing this at all." But yeah, anyways,
Cricut. She should get a. Do you have a Cricut?
I do not,
Put
I
it on
would
the Cricut. It sometimes it cuts it for you in the
uh
shape that it's been. Yeah, I do that sometimes when I have time.
hmm with our powers combined. Well, this has been great. I cannot wait I will hit you up with some different things and I have questions for you afterwards. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. But yeah, thank you for all you do. It's been a huge game changer in our apartment. So we all love it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Teach, Taskbox, Inspire. I hope you've gained some tips and motivation to fuel your week ahead. If you're ready to explore more strategies for empowering your students as independent learners, be sure to dive into my free training at chalkboardsuperhero.com/training. And don't keep all this knowledge to yourself. Share this episode with your special education teacher friends who could use some motivation and inspiration. One more thing before you go. If you're finding this podcast helpful and want to show support, head to Apple Podcasts and leave your rating and review. Until next time, keep teaching, taskboxing, and inspiring.